Hello and welcome to Interact, brought to you by Reliance General Insurance and all of us at Autocar India. Now, it's been a while since our last session of Interact, and we've had a horrific second wave of the pandemic in between. It's really been terrible. It's invaded our homes. So I want to start off by hoping and asking and praying that all of you and your loved ones are safe and well. Well, this definitely has changed our life in many ways, the way we live, the way we interact, and of course even the way we drive. And that's really the topic of today's session, which is car ownership in a work from home age. When you have these lockdowns, restrictions, offices are shut, what does this mean in terms of car ownership? Well, I'd like to start off by talking about a bit of basics on, let's say, just maintaining your car in these extended lockdown periods. It's very much the basics. Cars need to be really looked after because in the end they're machined with lots of complex parts, and of course they really need kid gloves, especially in times like this. So a few basics when you're storing your car at home. One, of course, is I think start off by trying to keep it covered. Use a good quality cover because you want a cover that can breathe, it doesn't trap moisture. We're getting into the monsoon season, so clearly that could be an issue. You don't want moisture really getting into your car, and moisture and humidity actually are the biggest enemies of cars which are lying still for a long while, which we'll get to later. You need to keep your fuel tank again as full as possible to avoid the moisture from the air above that, again contaminating the fuel. Keep your car parked on a level ground. Try not to use the handbrake because sometimes the handbrake gets jammed. You can use let's say a chocks over there to keep your car to make sure that the car doesn't move. And to be honest, the best thing is to try and start the car every now and then and get all the parts warmed up, because really cars need that little bit of tender loving care in terms of parts need to be moving, all the electronics need to be operated, they need to heat up, drive the moisture out, that sort of thing. That really keeps the car in good shape. I mean, I just heard of a friend who had a high-end luxury car. He didn't start it for a year. The minute he put it on, there were some 20 warning lights that had come on. That's not something you want. So really a lot of inactivity is not good. Try and start the car at least every week. Now let's move to what sort of car you should have, because you are entering let's say an age, I would say, because this is not going to go away anyway soon, where there is a very, very strong work from home culture. You may not be going to office every day, or you may even having much shorter commute. So I think this is the time to be practical. If you don't need a very big car, you can go in for a small car, a car that's easy to run about in, easy to park, and clearly if you are shifting from public transport to personal mobility, you really do want something that's very compact and easy to use. So I would say I would downscale a bit and use a smaller car if you don't need to be carrying too many people, if that's really okay with you. In fact is that you are just single and you don't have a family. But again, some people do have to travel long distances. You could use a bigger car. You can even look at some good second-hand options that there are right now, because everything's very fluid, everything's in a bit of a flux. So if you don't want to spend too much, there are a lot of good second-hand options out there as well. So I think to sum up, I think in a work from home age, you've got to relook at your mobility needs. I think just be as practical as possible, be as frugal as possible right now, because if you're not going to be driving too much and you're going to be driving just short runs, and that too not every day, you don't really need to have the best, most expensive, the most feature rich car. But of course a lot of people do want that as well. No harm in having that. So we've got a whole lot of questions where people will be asking us this. So straight into that, I want to start off with questions which are related to looking after your car. And Rahul Singh's question is, after a period of non-use, what are the things we should change or service in our cars? Well, frankly, the consumables like oils, filters and all, they really don't need to change, they just need to change as per the service schedule. So frankly, you really don't need to change anything. But I think the idea is you need to start the car. As I said, I can't overemphasize that enough, and make sure things are working, and then obviously if they are not, you have to get them replaced. Very likely that a few electronics could have gone bust because of the humidity in them, and you've not started it, so there's no heat to drive that humidity out, and it's persisted and damaged certain parts. So I think non-use, if there is something going wrong, that will manifest itself in some sort of warning signal, or probably when you drive the car, if there's some odd sound, whether it's brakes, whether it's some squeaky bits of the car which need lubrication, all that will come to the fore. Ranjit Prakash's question is, can you please give us some tire tips for cars during the lockdown? Well, I think what one needs to understand that tires, they do tend to deform if they are unused, or the car isn't moved for a very long time. So the best thing is to try and move the car back and forth a bit. But if that's really not possible, or you have some still parking where you can't do that, it's better to overinflate the tires, because then it kind of compensates for the deformity which might occur if the car is not used for some time. We've got Abhinit who wants to know, are we likely to see further extensions in deadlines to get free service or warranty extensions? Now, all the manufacturers have done that in the lockdown, clearly, because you haven't been able to get the car to the service station. So they've extended their deadlines for service schedules, and that's that's great, and I think that should be done. And I think this manufacturers, on a case-to-case basis, I think they will look at kind of honoring, let's say, or if you've gone beyond the deadline, they would probably honor the free service over there. But I think the concern is that service center, there's risk of exposure to multiple people at this time. Is there a safer way to get the car maintained? Well, there is this trend of service being done at home. There is one company I know called Home Mechanic, which is supported by Indian Oil. They are present in a couple of cities in the north, and they come with their service van and do all the servicing at your house. That's the best way possible. But again, this is an independent operation, so obviously it would be done for cars outside the warranty period. But I think this trend will kind of gather pace as more and more manufacturers will be doing this as well, in terms of offering let's say a mobile service, so you don't have to worry about taking your cars to the service station. But of course, I think sometimes there is a lot of paranoia on that, is will your car be contaminated? But I think what the car manufacturers are doing, they're completely sanitizing the car perfectly, so there's really no need to worry when the car comes back to you. Rohan's question is, he's seen a lot of antivirus or antibacterial treatment for cars. Do they make sense, or are they a scam? No, they definitely do make sense, and I think there are a lot of good products out there. I think the main thing is to try and avoid an alcohol-based one, and use a benzalkonium chloride product, which really is much safer, and it does the job just as well. It's kind of an antimicrobial disinfectant, and you've got some great products out there, and I think actually disinfecting your car from time to time is really a good idea, and should be done quite regularly. Shashank has written in, and his question is, how much of a long-term effect does non-use have on cars, especially modern diesel cars? Well, I think as far as the engine goes, there's really not too much to worry about, both petrol and diesel engines. So I think it's specific to diesel. I don't think there's more of a problem with diesel than there is over petrol or any powertrain, because really the mechanical side, that's all sorted. It's really the electronics, and cars have so many electronics these days that really becomes the problem. And I think not using the car, a lot of electronics can become faulty. So again, I can't overemphasize enough, is you've got to get everything working. So from time to time, it's not just enough to start the engine and move the car a bit. Start the engine, get it warmed up to operating temperature. You can move it around a bit, and in addition, put all 4 windows up and down, because sometimes you don't want the motors getting jammed, or let's say getting moisture. You want them also to keep be in constant operation. A little heat goes into that, again that drives moisture out. Put on the aircon, put on the stereo system, in fact put on every feature on the car. If you've got a sunroof, slide that back and forth a couple of times. Just use every bit of equipment in the car, because a car is one thing is that where non-use actually can make things go wrong. Again, specifically for that one reason which I've been talking about is humidity. And when things start working, there's a little bit of friction, a little bit of heat, and that kind of drives the humidity out and doesn't let that humidity settle on that part for a long period of time, which again could cause problems. So again, non-use not good. Just use the car as much as possible, even in a limited space, and all the features and all the operation of the car. So as I said, just put on everything for a bit, and then shut it off. So it can be let's say a ritual of about 20 minutes, even once a week is fine. Surya's question is, during lockdown, is it better to use to keep the car covered or keep it exposed to the elements? I think we've covered this earlier, and again I'll reiterate, it's better to use a car cover, but it's better to use a really good car cover. A bad cover can actually cause problems if it traps moisture within and doesn't let the car so to say breathe through the cover. So you need a really good quality cover, and I think a good quality cover is really a good accessory to have. It really does protect the car if you have a parking slot outside. Now Rehan says he's bought an SUV about 5 months back, and he noticed that the disc brakes, they tend to have surface rust on them, and very quickly. This affects braking performance for the first few minutes and also results in a very embarrassing squeaking noise when he leaves the building. Is this because of non-use? Is this a worrying thing? Actually, this is a really common thing which we've seen. A lot of consumers has even complained about. It's really not really not serious. That's very superficial rust, which really can come off with once the brakes heated up, once the brakes are operated, once the pads start let's say operating on the disc. And I think one thing you can do is to lightly to drive the car and do a light left foot braking. That would really get enough heat into the pad and to the disc and kind of burn off that, or get rid of that superficial rust. But if that doesn't happen, you might need to go to a service station to get it off. But it's really not a big deal. It's not something that's a major worry, and a lot of cars have shown this. In fact, all cars have shown this, especially in the monsoon. You just leave them let's say not used in the open for even a couple of days, and you'll see the rust build up on the disc. But that's really because the surface area of the metal is such, and the oxidation happens quite fast. But it's really not so much of an issue, and nothing really to worry about. Sonal's question is, when his car is parked and not used, is it safe to fill tires by about 5 to 10 psi more than recommended pressures? Is that too high? No, it's not too high at all. In fact, I think one thinks that you fill tires and they'll just explode like that. No, it doesn't happen, and 10 psi is absolutely fine. Not a big deal at all. But remember that you need to remember to drop your pressures when you start driving, for the simple reason the ride will be extremely hard, and you will also compromise your contact patch, which might even shrink a bit because of the higher inflated pressure, and 10 psi is quite a lot. But to store the car with 10 psi, absolutely no problem. In fact, it's pretty good because it makes your tire typically more round than with a lower pressure or the recommended standard pressure. We've got some car buying questions from Siddharth Chowgle. His question is, does a larger car like an SUV offer better social distancing as compared to a smaller hatchback or a sedan? Well, theoretically yes, because there's more space between individuals or passengers in a larger car than there would be in a smaller car, but the fact is that you're close enough. I think what I'd like to talk about is in a car, I think the best thing you can have is proper airflow management of fresh air. I think if you are traveling, there's nothing like having all the windows down, because I think that way any viral load gets dissipated much faster rather than being circulated. I think the worst thing you can do is have a car full of people, and if some of them are infected, that's really asking for trouble, with the recirculation button on of the aircon. So fresh air mode for sure if you're using the AC. And the best thing is actually not to use the AC at all and have the windows down, because really that way you keep as much fresh air into the cabin as possible, and that's really the best thing to keep exposure to the viral load as little as possible. So I think though theoretically, just to sum that up, though theoretically a bigger car does give you more of social distancing, but I think it's more how you manage the airflow in the car that makes all the difference. Another question is, and sorry, it's anonymous, we don't have a name here, but the question is, since he works from home and the use of a car is only 2 to 3 times a week, what would be the ideal car for me? While a basic entry level car does the job, does it make buying something more expensive? Well, I think this is what we've come to. I think it really depends. I mean, if you're not going to be using the car that much, you're obviously not going to be enjoying it that much, or making the maximum out of it. My suggestion would be to go for something a little smaller, something that's easy to park, something that you really don't have to worry about, because it's going to be very erratic use of this car. So it's not going to be in a structured way, especially if you're just going to be working from home and just doing odd jobs. I think it's, as I said, better to downsize in this day and age, and get something practical that fits your needs. Of course, that's only if you're single, because if you need a family, it's better to have as big a car as possible. We've got another question which is concerning the petrol and diesel prices. Yes, they have gone through the roof. Petrol has hit a century. So not something we need to celebrate, but yeah, it's breached the 100 rupee per litre mark, and obviously that's causing a lot of angst, and really this question is about that. So the question is that the way the petrol prices and the way the petrol and diesel prices are, and the uncertainty surrounding the pandemic, does it make any sense buying a new car today, or should a buying decision be deferred in favor of an electric car in the coming 12 to 18 months? Well, buying a new car today, I think it really depends on what your need is. If you need mobility, yes, definitely buy a new car. I mean, it's much better than taking public transport. Of course, not everyone can afford a new car, but if you can, I think that should be a priority right now, purely from keeping yourself safe. As I say, a car is really a bubble on wheels, a PPE suit on wheels, and really the safest way to travel, especially if you are alone, because really gives you a high level of protection, from infection. And coming to electric cars, well, frankly, electric cars, yes, you don't have to pay for the fuel at all. It's a great feeling not having to visit a petrol station ever once you have an electric car, but the point is they are still quite expensive. You've got the Nexon EV, which is really a good value car, in the sense it's really the most affordable right now. But again, it is quite expensive. So if you're looking at an electric car as a way of, running costs, the fact is that the price of the car still won't offset the running cost to a great extent, and especially if you are going to be driving it short distances, so or not too much. So clearly, electric car, not from an economic point of view, but again, just from the point of view that there is a certain level of let's say satisfaction you get not having to pay these ridiculous prices for petrol, and of course saving the environment, which is really the main thing about an electric car and why people buy it. Vivek has a question, and that is he wants to know, should he choose a car that offers more tech versus car that offers solid build quality? What would be better in the long run and for long-term ownership? Well, clearly cars with more tech, cars that are more complex, there are more chances of things going wrong with those cars. So, I mean, rule of thumb is cars which are more simple and solid, obviously they offer better reliability. But that's not to say that that is always the case. there are exceptions to the rule. I mean, for me, a company like Toyota is a great example of absolutely bulletproof reliability, and they have a fair amount of features and electronics and technology in their cars. So I think it really depends on the brand as well and the reputation they have. So, but overall, I think it's quite clear that the more complexity in a car there is, the more chances of things going wrong with it. Preeti Kumar's question is, why don't automakers make small, compact two-door cars for youth, as you see in countries like Europe, something like a Fiat 500 or even smaller? Well, yes, I think in today's, as I said, work from home age, where you want a car that's small, compact and just for yourself, something like that would make sense. But the fact is that two-door cars really haven't taken off in India. There's just no market for it. People don't see value in it because at some level they do want to travel with some additional passengers, and the two-door cars are really impractical for that. Of course, one big exception is the Mahindra Thar. That's a two-door car, and that's really completely stormed the market by the kind of demand it has. But clearly that's a very lifestyle product, a very different kind of product, and not let's say something that one would use always as a city runabout. Rudrak's Rudrak's has a question, why is there a sudden hike in waiting periods? Is it because of lockdowns or are there other reasons? Well, the biggest reason really is that there is a big supply issue right now. Supply of parts to make cars in factories. You know, all car makers depend on components which come from outside. In fact, most of the car, about 80% of the car is actually outsourced, which means it is built with components which come from other suppliers, other companies, and they all come in. And I think today the biggest problem is the microchip, the semiconductor issue, which is really a worldwide issue right now. I mean, there's a huge shortage of it. Just to give you a quick background of that is, after the first, when the first pandemic hit, automakers kind of scaled down their demand for these microchips. So what the microchip guys did, or the semiconductor manufacturers did, there are very few of them in the world, just a handful of them. They kind of diverted their production to other let's say other technologies or other products like phones, like gaming consoles, all that sort of thing. And in fact, the automotive industry just accounts for about 12% of the total semiconductor market. So again, the auto industry was bumped down in priority for the semiconductor makers, and basically told the auto industry, listen guys, we are absolutely maxed out on capacity and we don't have enough for you. And this has become a global issue because you can't just ramp up the production that easily. And I think this is going to continue for the next couple of months. So this is primarily the issue of why there are long waiting periods, is because the supply is a problem. There are the issues also of container shortage. So when parts come from abroad, there's also disruption over there. So these are the main issues why there is a big waiting period, why there are long waiting periods. Jaishi has a question. We have a 5-year-old hatchback in the family. Does it make sense keeping it on and driving it, or does it make sense investing in a new car right now? Well, 5 years is about the time you would want to change your car. That's the time to, let's say, upgrade. But I think it might be a better time to wait because, as I said in the earlier question, there are these long waiting periods. You're not getting the best deals. There's a lot of disruption, there's a lot of flux in the market right now. So if the car's running fine, I would say hang on a bit, let things settle globally, not only with the supply side, but even see how the pandemic plays out. Launches have been delayed right now. So until I think things settle down, might be a good idea to just hang on if the car's not giving you too much trouble, maybe for another year or so, and then get into the market for a new car. Rakesh has got a question. Is there a reason for sudden increase in price hikes in the used car market, especially for smaller cars like the Alto, Wagoner, etc.? Well, I think what's happened is that because there's a shortage of new cars, people are tending to buy used cars, and also there's not enough supply of used cars because people are hanging on to their used cars as well. there are a lot of good used cars out there which have been discontinued, especially after BS6 in April 2020. So you've got a lot of good diesel now, so people are hanging on to them as because they're running quite well, and there's a big demand for these cars in the used car market because you can't get them new. So really the used car market gets impacted by what's happening in the new car market right now, and with long waiting periods, you're not getting a new car or certain models of them easily, so that is having an impact on the used car market as well. And so I think that's basically the questions we have, but I'll take one last question because I think we have some time, and this one is from Mohit. Mohit wants to know, is it better to buy a brand new smaller car versus a slightly used, slightly larger car versus older car, but a much larger luxury car, which is a better bet? I mean, I always tend to go towards the new car, frankly, because there's nothing like having a new car. It's absolutely brand new, fresh, no chance of something having happened to the car, though a lot of used cars do last quite well, depends on what you have. You get it to your specification, you've got all the free services there, you've got the warranties. It's just I would say just gives you more peace of mind. And I think, as I said, right now I'm one for slightly more compact cars, especially in the current environment. Whereas a slightly larger car, yes, you might get the space, you might get the feeling or the feel of a big car, which again is very, very different from a small car. It gives you a certain sense of satisfaction when you're driving it, but again, being used, you're not always sure of what you're getting, and of course cars tend to age quite fast, and again it will depreciate as well when you want to sell it. So I think overall, as I said, I think for me a new car is always the one I would look at. Well, that's it from me from Interact for this session. Thanks so much for all your questions, and we'll be back with another session soon. Thank you.